Hello, my name is Tony. When I caught up with it, or it caught up with me, it was around 1972. Took a ridiculously long time from release to hit the screen of my local, but that was the way of the world back then. In the provinces, you just had to bide your time and be patient. I knew about the controversy, the notoriety, the adverse reaction to the violence, but only understood later the antipathy from Western movie purists who weren't best pleased at the radical refocusing of the mythology they'd grown up with. The Wild Bunch was like punk rock in the way that it challenged the existing order. Punk was the last youth movement to essentially rattle the establishment, after which youth culture became effete, impotent, and a waste of space. In spirit, the Wild Bunch had the same powerful suggestions of danger and threat at heart, the same windmill tilting gravity and volatility. It changed things. The Spaghettis recalibrated the traditional Western landscape in the 60s, but were more comfortably viewed as a temporary aberration, a foreign phenomenon, and outside influence, a fad from abroad that shook the ground a bit without causing too much disruption. Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde in 1967 had more permanence, pushed the envelope for bloody on-screen violence. It paved the way to a significant extent, yet was easier to swallow as a stylized slice of Americana, an autobiographical narrative of 20s gangsters and outlaws, plus it was something of a love story with two beautiful and charismatic stars. But the Wild Bunch was something else. This was one of the very first films that sprang to mind before I started these video reviews during the first COVID lockdown. 3 years ago now. I've resisted doing it for a number of reasons. In the pantheon of Sam Peckinpah's work, it's too obvious a subject. No one speaks of Peckinpah without mentioning it, or if they don't mention it, they're thinking about it. Next, I'm too close to it to be all that objective. I almost like it too much, revere it too intensely. Finally, it requires someone better than me to do it justice. I don't have the right tools in my intellectual arsenal to tackle it without a struggle, and I'm never all that keen on working too hard with subjects that may cause me technical difficulty. Then again, just because it's not going to be easy maybe isn't a good enough reason for not doing it, and several people have requested it over time, so being very suggestible and more than a little flippant in my undertakings, I'm going to give it a shot. It may not be very good, you may not like it, you may not enjoy it, but like what the fuck, you can always walk away. The script by Waylon Green, rewritten and reshaped by Peckinpah, lays down the following narrative. It's 1913 in Texas, and Pike Bishop, William Holden, is the leader of a gang of aging outlaws who have managed to survive far longer than their chosen occupation normally allows. The core of the gang, including Bishop, a Dutch Engstrom, Ernest Borgnine, two brothers Lyle and Tector Gorch, Warren Oates and Ben Johnson respectively, cantankerous old-timer Sykes, Edmund O'Brien, Hispanic youth Angel, Jamie Sanchez, and mentally unstable Clarence Crazy Lee, Bo Hopkins, whose nickname just about says everything regarding his character. Bishop knows they're running out of time and road, so aims to commit one last robbery before retiring. The job is to hit a railroad payroll office for a hoard of silver. What he doesn't know is that corrupt railroad official Harrigan Albert Decker has hired a posse of bounty hunters, including Bishop's ex-partner Deke Thornton, Robert Ryan, to set up an ambush. The robbery turns into a catastrophic shitshow with half of Pike's gang being wiped out, Clarence Lee going nuts, singing hymns and blowing people away with wild abandon, and the innocent participants in a temperance parade getting blasted to pieces in the crossfire as Pike and his surviving men manage to escape. When they rendezvous with Sykes, and after mercy killing a gang member blinded by a shotgun blast to the face, Pike discovers that the loot they thought they'd got away with is nothing but a chest full of worthless steel washers, planted by Harrigan. Broke desperate, they head for Mexico to Angel's home village. They learn of General Mapache Emilio Fernandez, a cruel and sadistic locally based commanding officer in the Mexican Federal Army. He's been oppressing and stealing from the villagers to support his campaign against the revolutionary Pancho Villa. The gang ride to Mapache's HQ and, this not being the Magnificent Seven, instead offer to work for the general. Negotiations are going well until Angel gets incensed that it is his former sweetheart Teresa Sonia Emilio nestled in Mapache's arms. Angel shoots her dead and nearly gets the rest of the gang killed into the bargain, but Bishop manages to calm things down. This is the point where it starts to become apparent that Angel could be the undoing of everything. In other words, a fucking liability. There's always one, yeah? Mapache offers gold if the gang will rob a US supply train transporting guns and ammunition. They agree. Angel offers to give up his share of the gold if Bishop agrees to provide 1 case of rifles and ammunition to a peasant revolutionary force. Bishop accepts and the train robbery goes as planned. Until, that is, Thornton and the posse turn up. Time is bought by Bishop blowing up a trestle bridge as the posse is crossing, dumping the men and their horses into the Rio Grande. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that a cruel psychopath like Mapache will renege on the deal, so Bishop will supply only a few cases of guns and ammunition to the general at a time, taking payment in gold for each delivered shipment. When the last shipment is delivered by Angel and Dutch, Mapache accuses Angel of stealing a case to give to the rebels. He is captured and beaten while Dutch is allowed to leave. After burying most of the gold, Bishop, Dutch, Lyle and Tector return to Mapache's town, where they find Angel being tortured, dragged along behind the general's motorcar. They offer to pay in gold for Angel's release. Mapache refuses. The men spend the night drinking and fornicating in a local brothel. In the cold light of day, they reflect on their lives and situation, where and what they are, and decide to liberate Angel by force if necessary. Arming up, they walk to Mapache's base. Mapache seemingly agrees to let the seriously physically damaged Angel go, but at the last moment slits his throat in front of the gang. Pike shoots Mapache and his German military advisor, and the Wild Bunch go to work in a truly stunning carnival of gunfire and bloody violence in which they make devastating use of a tripod-mounted machine gun. Mapache staffed most of his troops and a lot of bystanders, and indeed the Wild Bunch themselves are eventually killed. Thornton arrives later and surveys the carnage. He finds Bishop's body and takes his old friend's revolver. The rest of the bounty hunters strip the bodies of his one-time comrades of any valuables and load their corpses onto horses to transport back to Texas for the reward. Thornton sits outside the town gates in the dust. He declines to go back with the posse, whom he regards as gutter trash. Time passes. Thornton hears distant gunfire. Sykes turns up with a ramshackle bunch of Mexican rebels in tow. He informs that they ran into the departing posse and provided them with a swift departure from the world altogether. Sykes invites Thornton to join them in the revolution against the Mexican government.
You want to come along? It ain't like it used to be, but it'll do.
He gets on his feet and with a resigned smile agrees to tag along. Now that's simply a sketch of the storyline. There's a lot more going on than I've described in that synopsis, but I'm sure you get the gist. Although Peckinpah had become something of a professional pariah following production difficulties with Major Dundee, his previous film, and getting fired from Steve McQueen's The Cincinnati Kid, Noon Wine, a TV movie he wrote and directed, saw him nominated for several awards and gave him some renewed currency in the industry. Added to this, Warner Brothers wanted a western flick to pitch against 20th Century Fox's forthcoming Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Peckinpah just happened to be available with a script for The Wild Bunch in his midst. Fortuitous that. The Wild Bunch wasn't accidental. Peckinpah formulated his intent right from the start. He'd become troubled by the sanitized, bloodless violence in film and TV westerns. Even the spaghettis didn't provide all that much in the way of realistic gore. He felt traditional western media was playing a kid's game of cowboys and Indians, glamorizing death and murder before the camera, wherein the real consequences of putting a bullet in someone were never visually realized with any accuracy. He imagined realistic violence as a cathartic tool, that people should be exposed to it and thus sickened by it. And some were and are, but Sam forgot two things: general human nature and the notion of blood and circuses. A lot of us are excited by violent action, mostly when we're not the ones on the receiving end and located at a safe distance. Many people wanted to see The Wild Bunch because it was violent in ways that had been hitherto unseen. It became a selling point. Well, it's what initially sold it to me, to be honest. Groundbreaking for the time was Peckinpah's use of multiple camera angles and the playback of scenes at different speeds. The use of slow motion techniques which accentuated the chaos and visceral impact of the gunfights. Rapid cut editing added dynamic spice to the visual mix, along with inspired sound design. What really sets The Wild Bunch apart though is the characters and its unflinching alternative approach to the mythology of the Western. John Wayne complained that it destroyed the myth of the Old West. Peckinpah was invested in showing an era at the end of its short life, posing the question vision of what happens to outlaws when they've lived too long ploughing the same furrow. He wanted to find the answer set in a raw and authentically realised environment, not the idealised fantasy West constructed over decades and decades from thousands of traditional Western movies of years past. I don't think his agenda was to smash illusions as a callous act of destruction, but rather to inform and impress that there was a line between the Hollywood dream world and the one of something approaching reality, to create a vision of what the West might have really been like, and this was what the other side of that line looked like. He noted that in the US, real-life violence in the shape of the Vietnam War was being screened on the early evening news around mealtimes. He figured that the Wild Bunch could be somewhat allegoric to that, a graphic ballet of realistic bloodshed and carnage. Effectively, this is what it's like to be shot and when you shoot someone. Despite the list of actors he considered for roles in the Wild Bunch, 8 or more apiece for the parts of Pike and Dutch alone, he eventually made the smartest of smart moves. He chose players with a history of appearing in traditional westerns, familiar faces who had starred alongside the likes of Duke Wayne, James Stewart and Randolph Scott. Familiar players from the traditional westerns recognisable to audiences, yet now repurposed into a different sort of western universe. Not only that, they were playing crude, hair-trigger, violent, murderous men, not heroes, but outlaws, hardened thieves and casual killers. By some almost prophetic masterstroke, each single actor seems custom-built for their respective part. Casting isn't everything, but sometimes it can come damn close. One of the central themes that Peckinpah explores is that of betrayal. Pike has a code, but it is one that is too often eroded by time and circumstances. When Dutch rages about Thornton working for the railroad, he excuses it by saying he gave his word.
Damn that Deke Thornton to hell.
What would you do in his place? He gave his word.
Gave his word to a railroad. It's his word! That ain't what counts! It's who you give it to!
When you side with a man, you stay with him, and if you can't do that, you're like some animal. You're finished.
Yet at points he is shown to violate his own code. The calculated abandonment of Clarence Lee to his fate, cutting Thornton loose in flashback when the law caught up with them way back when, and finally leaving Angel in the hands of Mapache. His words come back to haunt him. In the end, his guilt and despair become almost overwhelming, propelling him and his 3 comrades in arms to do what they believe to be the right thing and fulfill their collective death wish in the process. Despite everything else, the lasting impression of the Wild Bunch is one of a dazzling visual and sonic artistry, overlaid with haunting emotional impact. There is sadness, and it's like the knowledge of a terminal illness, the truest sense that time is running out, things are changing, a way of life no longer tenable, men becoming fatally anachronistic in a rapidly modernising world. We've got to start thinking beyond our guns, Bishop says. Those days are closing fast. But how do you start thinking beyond the only thing you've ever known? Answer is, you don't, as the ending demonstrably goes to show. There are so many singular standout moments, so many critical and intricate creative details, you won't catch them all in one viewing. A few obvious ones then that I personally reabsorb every time I see it. When the Wild Bunch first ride into the town at the outset of the film, they encounter a group of children torturing scorpions by placing them atop a nest of fire ants. When they leave, the kids have set fire to straw placed on top of the scorpions and the fire ants, killing them all. The escalation of violence and cruelty in the young and innocent. You can see it reflected in the climactic shootout.
If they move, kill them.
Borgnine's smile when he trains his rifle on the train guards. Pike saluting Thornton and the posse with his hat just before the bridge blows up. The small bird breathing its last on the cot in the brothel as they leave. The final walk through Mapache's town, the bunch all tooled up, heading out to raise hell. Spine-tingling stuff. The pause. Oh, the pause. After Bishop shoots Mapache, everyone freezes in shock. The bunch look at each other in turn. Borgnine laughs chillingly. Then the shooting really begins. A peerless moment of atmosphere, tension, and razor-sharp editing. Absolutely classic. The woman shooting Bishop in the back after he lets her live. This is Peckinpah after all. Pike turns around, snarls bitch, and doesn't let her live any longer. Okay, I'm going to have to slip in some potential negatives. The flashback sequences are handled clumsily and I find them somewhat jarring. And whilst I don't really begrudge Peckinpah his moments of romanticism, the idyllic Mexican village moments with mariachi choral vocalizing and flowers being handed out and villagers waving bye-bye in slow-mo are as cliched and mawkish as hell. Let's not dwell on that stuff though. Peckinpah created a monumental hymn to the passing of an age. It is poetic, lyrical, elegiac, a super violent eulogy to the men in the West that was and the men in the West that never was, powered by blood, guts, thought, heart and soul, embellished by a wonderful purposeful score by Jerry Fielding and magnificent cinematography from Lucien Ballard. As a whole creation, it is simply one of the very best American movies ever made, and I'll defend that position absolutely. It personifies the term masterpiece. Amen to that, pilgrims. Jesus, I found that exhausting. So, time for a little rest, methinks. Anyhow, thanks for your time and attention, I appreciate it. Please consider hitting like, don't like, leaving a comment, subscribing, checking out my Patreon page, or sending a gratuity with a very important thanks button below. I'll be back in the near future with something or another. Fond farewell for now.